The crystal chandeliers cast golden light across the private dining room at Vittorio, one of Manhattan's most exclusive Italian restaurants. Lucia Grant moved between the chairs with practiced efficiency, her black server's apron tied neatly at her waist, white blouse crisp, despite the late hour. Tuesday nights were usually slower, but not tonight. 6 men sat around the mahogany table, their conversation a low murmur beneath the soft classical music filtering through hidden speakers. Lucia had learned long ago to make herself invisible during these private gatherings. Wealthy men conducting business didn't want to be interrupted by questions about wine pairings or dessert menus. She placed a fresh bottle of Barolo on the table, careful not to let the glass clink against the surface. The man at the head of the table didn't look up, his attention fixed on the leather portfolio spread before him. Alexander Bellini. Even if the manager hadn't briefed the staff with hushed urgency about tonight's guest, Lucia would have recognized power when she saw it. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than she made in 6 months, tailored so perfectly it seemed molded to his frame. Dark hair swept back from a face that belonged on old Italian statues, all sharp angles and commanding presence. His eyes, a deep brown that caught the light when he shifted, scanned documents with the kind of focus that made everything else in the room fade into background noise. "The terms are acceptable," one of the other men said in English, his accent vaguely European. 80 million for exclusive import rights across the eastern seaboard. Your family will handle distribution through existing channels. Lucia refilled water glasses, her movements mechanical. She'd served hundreds of business dinners in her 3 years at Vittorio. This one looked no different from the others, just men in expensive suits making deals that would never touch her world. "The vineyard contracts are here," another man added, sliding papers across the table. "Signed by the producers in Tuscany. Everything is legitimate." Alexander leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "My attorney will review before I sign anything. Standard procedure." The man who'd spoken first laughed, the sound too loud for the elegant room. Of course. We expect nothing less from the Bellini family. Your reputation for thoroughness is well known." Lucia moved toward the far end of the table to collect empty plates. 2 men sat slightly apart from the main conversation, their heads bent close together. They spoke quietly, words tumbling out in rapid syllables that made Lucia's hands still for just a fraction of a second. Sicilian, her grandmother's language, the one Carmela had taught her during long afternoons in their cramped Queen's apartment, insisting that Lucia remember where their family came from, even if they'd been in America for 2 generations. "Tuesday is perfect," one of the men murmured, his Sicilian flowing with an accent that didn't quite match the regional dialect. "The explosives are already positioned at the port. When Bellini signs and moves his operation to the new warehouse location, we detonate. The cartel takes the territory while he's dealing with the chaos." Lucia's heart slammed against her ribs. She kept her face blank, years of service industry training allowing her to maintain the neutral expression of someone who understood nothing. Her hands continued their work, stacking plates with steady movements that betrayed none of the ice spreading through her veins. "The Colombians confirmed?" the second man asked, also in Sicilian, though his accent carried hints of something else beneath it. "Mexican, maybe." The realization made her stomach turn. "Yes. Once Bellini is eliminated, Sinaloa controls everything from Baltimore to Boston. The contract signing is just theater. He won't leave this building alive if the signature doesn't come through tonight." Lucia's mind raced. These weren't Italian businessmen. They were cartel members posing as legitimate wine importers, and Alexander Bellini had no idea he was walking into a trap. She glanced at him across the table. He was reviewing another document, a gold pen poised over the signature line. His second in command, a broad-shouldered man who'd been introduced as Joseph, stood near the door with the kind of stillness that suggested military training. 2 other security personnel flanked the room's entrance, alert but not alarmed. No one else had noticed the conversation in Sicilian. Why would they? It was a dead language to most people, especially in a city like New York where a dozen languages mixed on every street corner. Lucia picked up her tray of dishes and turned toward the kitchen, her pulse thundering in her ears. She could walk away, pretend she'd heard nothing. She was a waitress, not a hero. Whatever war these men were waging had nothing to do with her. But if she stayed silent, Alexander Bellini would die tonight. Maybe others too, if the explosives at the port were real. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory, words spoken during one of their last conversations before Carmela passed away 3 years ago. We don't turn away from people in danger, Lucia. Our family survived because strangers showed courage when it mattered. You carry that same blood. Lucia set the tray down on the service cart near the wall and picked up the wine bottle she'd opened earlier. Her hands trembled slightly as she approached Alexander's chair, the weight of what she was about to do settling over her like a physical presence. "Excuse me, sir," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "May I refresh your glass?" Alexander glanced up, his dark eyes meeting hers for the first time that evening. Something in his gaze shifted, a flicker of attention that suggested he actually saw her rather than just acknowledging her presence. "Please," he said. Lucia leaned in, angling the bottle over his glass. Her mouth was close to his ear, close enough that her whisper would carry to him alone. She switched to Sicilian, the words flowing with the same fluency her grandmother had drilled into her since childhood. "It's a trap. Don't sign anything. They're planning to kill you tonight." Alexander went absolutely still. Thepin in his hand stopped moving. The small muscle in his jaw flexed once, the only visible reaction to her words. His eyes cut to her face, searching, analyzing. Lucia straightened, moving the bottle away as if she'd simply poured his wine. Her heart hammered so violently she was certain everyone in the room could hear it. For 3 seconds that felt like hours. Nothing happened. Then Alexander set down his pen with deliberate care and pushed back from the table slightly, his posture shifting from relaxed businessman to something far more dangerous. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made everyone stop talking immediately. "I've reconsidered. This deal moves too fast for my comfort. We'll postpone the signing until my team completes a full audit of your operations." The man who'd presented the contract stiffened. "Mr. Bellini, we've been negotiating for months. Everything is in order. Then you won't mind waiting another week while I verify that." Alexander's tone allowed no argument. His eyes flicked to the 2 men who'd been speaking in Sicilian, and Lucia saw the exact moment those men realized something had gone wrong. One of them reached inside his jacket. "Joseph," Alexander said calmly. The security chief moved like water, fluid and impossibly fast. He had the reaching man's arm twisted behind his back before the weapon cleared leather, driving him face first into the mahogany table with enough force to rattle the wine glasses. Chaos erupted. The second Sicilian-speaking man lunged toward Alexander, but 2 more security personnel materialized from positions Lucia hadn't even noticed, intercepting him mid-stride. Chairs crashed backward. One of the other businessmen shouted something in Spanish, confirming Lucia's suspicions about the cartel connection. Alexander remained seated, utterly composed, as his people subdued the attackers with professional efficiency. Within 90 seconds, all 5 supposed businessmen were on their knees, hands secured behind their backs with zip ties that Joseph produced from somewhere inside his jacket. "Clear the weapon," Alexander ordered, his eyes never leaving the men on the floor. "Check them all." Joseph and his team found 4 handguns, 2 knives, and what looked like a phone detonator on the man who'd spoken about explosives. Alexander examined each item as it was placed on the table in front of him, his expression carved from stone. Lucia had backed against the wall during the commotion, her tray forgotten on the service cart. She pressed her palms flat against the cool plaster, trying to steady her breathing. Alexander's gaze found her across the room. He stood in one fluid movement and crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. Up close, he was taller than she'd realized, easily 6'2" or 6'3". The air around him seemed to vibrate with controlled violence barely held in check. "What's your name?" he asked, his Sicilian carrying the authentic Palermo accent of someone who'd grown up speaking it. "Lucia," she managed. "Lucia Grant. You speak Sicilian." It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. "My grandmother taught me. She was from a village near Palermo. And you understood what they said?" "Yes." Her voice came out steadier now. "They're not wine importers. They're cartel. Sinaloa, I think, based on the accent underneath the Sicilian." They mentioned explosives at the port and taking territory after you signed the contract. This was supposed to be an ambush. Alexander studied her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed, as if he could see past her server's uniform to every secret she'd ever kept. You could have stayed silent, pretended you heard nothing. I could have, Lucia agreed. Her grandmother's face flashed through her mind again. But I didn't. Something shifted in Alexander's expression, not quite a smile, but a softening around his eyes that suggested approval. He turned to Joseph, switching back to English. Get Marco on the phone. Tell him to check the new warehouse at the port. If there are explosives, I want them found and disarmed within the hour. On it, boss. Joseph already had his phone out, stepping away to make the call. Alexander returned his attention to the men on the floor. Sinaloa cartel. Interesting choice, gentlemen. You're a long way from Mexico. The man who'd led the negotiations spat blood onto the hardwood floor. You're already dead, Bellini. This territory belongs to us now. You just don't know it yet. I disagree. Alexander's voice remained conversational, almost pleasant. But we'll have plenty of time to discuss your mistakes. Joseph, call our friends at the precinct. Tell them we have a gift for them. Multiple weapons charges, conspiracy to commit murder, attempted fraud. That should keep them occupied while we have a longer conversation about their employers. Lucia watched the scene unfold with a strange sense of detachment, as if she were observing from outside her own body. 10 minutes ago, she'd been a waitress worried about whether Table 7 needed more bread. Now she stood in the middle of what was clearly a mob operation, having just saved the life of one of New York's most powerful crime bosses, Miss Grant. Alexander's voice pulled her back to the present. Don't leave yet. We need to talk. It wasn't a request. Lucia nodded mutely, her throat too dry for words. The next 20 minutes passed in organized chaos. Police arrived with surprising speed, though the officers who entered the private dining room greeted Joseph by name and seemed unsurprised by the scene they found. The supposed businessmen were led away in handcuffs, still protesting their innocence despite the weapons and detonator sitting in evidence bags. Through it all, Alexander orchestrated everything from his position at the table, making calls on a slim black phone, issuing quiet orders that were followed without question. Lucia remained where he'd told her to stay, watching this man command an invisible empire with nothing more than tone and presence. Finally, Joseph returned from the hallway, where he'd been coordinating with someone on his phone. Marco found them, boss. 3 devices positioned throughout the new warehouse, just like she said. Bomb squad is handling it now, but Marco estimates they had enough explosives to level the entire building and take out half the block. Alexander's jaw tightened, the only visible reaction to the news that he'd been hours away from a catastrophic attack. His eyes found Lucia again, and this time she saw something she hadn't expected in those dark depths. Gratitude. And beneath it, a spark of interest that had nothing to do with business. Clear the room, he told Joseph. Everyone out except Miss Grant. The security team filed out efficiently, closing the heavy wooden door behind them with a soft click. Suddenly, the private dining room felt much smaller, the air between Lucia and Alexander charged with an energy she couldn't quite name. He gestured to one of the chairs at the table. Sit, please. Lucia crossed the room on legs that felt disconnected from her body and lowered herself into the chair, acutely aware of how out of place she looked in her server's uniform surrounded by the wreckage of the interrupted business deal. Alexander took the seat beside her rather than across the table, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and understated with notes of sandalwood and citrus. You saved my life tonight, he said quietly. Do you understand that? Lucia swallowed hard. I just did what anyone would do. No. The word came out flat, final. Most people would have pretended they heard nothing. Self-preservation is a powerful instinct, especially when crime families and cartels are involved. But you chose to warn me anyway. Why? She thought about lying, about giving him some noble reason that would make her sound brave rather than foolish. But something in his gaze demanded honesty. My grandmother always said we don't turn away from people in danger. That courage matters, even when it's scary. Lucia twisted the small gold earrings her grandmother had given her, a nervous habit she'd never broken. And I guess I couldn't live with myself if I'd let you walk into a trap when I could have stopped it. Alexander leaned back in his chair, studying her with that same unnerving intensity. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. She was. Carmela Grant, born Carmela Rizzo in Sicily. She came here when she was 20 and never went back. But she made sure I knew where we came from. When did she pass? 3 years ago. The familiar ache settled in Lucia's chest. She raised me after my parents died in a car accident. I was 9. I'm sorry. The condolence sounded genuine rather than reflexive. My parents were also from Palermo. They came to New York in the 70s, built their business from nothing. Lucia didn't ask what business. She had a pretty good idea, and naming it felt dangerous. The cartel will know you interfered, Alexander said, his tone shifting to something more serious. When those men are interrogated, they'll talk about what happened here tonight. Your involvement won't stay secret. The ice that had started to thaw in Lucia's veins returned with a vengeance. She hadn't thought that far ahead, hadn't considered the consequences beyond the immediate moment of warning him. What does that mean? Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. It means you're in danger now. Sinaloa doesn't forgive witnesses, especially ones who cost them this much. Alexander's expression hardened. I won't let anything happen to you because you saved my life. You're under my protection now, whether you want it or not. Lucia's first instinct was to argue, to insist she could take care of herself the way she always had. But the certainty in his voice, the absolute conviction that he could keep her safe, made the protest die in her throat. I don't even know you, she whispered. No, Alexander agreed. But after tonight, that's going to change. Lucia barely slept that night. She'd gone home to her studio apartment in Astoria around 2 a.m, escorted by 2 of Alexander's men who insisted on checking every corner of her building before letting her climb the stairs alone. They stayed in a black sedan across the street, windows tinted, exhaust pipe releasing steady clouds into the cold air. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the events at Vittorio over and over, the Sicilian conversation, Alexander's face when she'd whispered the warning, the guns, the zip ties, the casual efficiency with which his people had handled armed cartel members like they were dealing with unruly children. What had she gotten herself into? The knock on her door came at 7:45, sharp and authoritative. Lucia jerked upright, her heart immediately racing. She pulled on jeans and a sweater, fingers clumsy with adrenaline, and peered through the peephole. 2 men in dark suits stood in the narrow hallway. Not the same ones from last night, but they had that same quality of controlled alertness that marked them as Alexander's people. Miss Grant, the taller one said when she cracked open the door. Mr. Bellini requests your presence. We're here to escort you. Requests. As if she had a choice. Give me 5 minutes, Lucia said. She brushed her teeth, splashed water on her face, and pulled her hair into a ponytail with shaking hands. No makeup, no time to care about appearances. She grabbed her phone, her keys, and the small purse that held her license and the $63 currently in her checking account. The men led her downstairs to a different sedan, this one charcoal gray with tinted windows that made it impossible to see inside from the street. Lucia slid into the back seat, the leather cold even through her jeans. They drove in silence. Morning traffic clogged the streets, taxis honking, delivery trucks double-parked, the city slowly waking to another Wednesday. Lucia watched it all through the window, wondering if this was the last time she'd see her neighborhood as a free woman. The sedan pulled up in front of a glass tower in the financial district, all sleek lines and reflective surfaces that caught the weak November sunlight. The men escorted her through a lobby filled with marble and modern art, past security guards who nodded recognition, into an elevator that required a key card to access the top floors. Lucia's stomach dropped as they ascended. 42 floors, according to the digital display. The doors opened onto a reception area that looked like something from an architecture magazine. Minimalist furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows, abstract paintings that probably cost more than her car. A woman in her 30s with sharp eyes and an expensive suit looked up from behind a glass desk. Miss Grant, Mr. Bellini is expecting you. She was led down a hallway lined with closed doors, past what looked like conference rooms and executive offices, to a corner suite at the end. One of the escorts knocked twice and opened the door without waiting for a response. Alexander stood at the windows, his back to the room, phone pressed to his ear. He wore another impeccable suit, this one navy blue, his hair still damp from a recent shower. The office was massive, easily twice the size of Lucia's entire apartment, dominated by a desk that looked carved from a single piece of dark wood. "I don't care what it costs," Alexander said into the phone, his tone flat and final. "I want every port facility checked by tonight. If you find anything else, you call me immediately." He ended the call and turned. His eyes found Lucia immediately, sweeping over her casual clothes and bare face with an assessment that felt both thorough and strangely non-judgmental. "Sit," he said, gesturing to one of the leather chairs facing his desk. Lucia sat. The escorts left, closing the door behind them with a quiet click that felt ominous. Alexander moved around his desk but didn't sit. He leaned against the front edge, arms crossed, studying her with the same intensity he'd shown last night. "How much do you know about the Sinaloa cartel?" he asked without preamble. "Only what I see on the news. Drugs, violence, Mexico." Lucia's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Why? Because they put a price on your head last night." The words hit like a physical blow. Lucia gripped the arms of the chair, her knuckles going white. "What?" "The men we arrested talked. They always do, eventually." Alexander's expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes suggested anger beneath the calm surface. "They reported back to their handlers before the police took them. Your description, your name from the restaurant's employee records, everything. Sinaloa doesn't forgive witnesses, especially ones who cost them an $80 million operation and a foothold in New York." Lucia's mouth went dry. "I'm just a waitress. I don't know anything else about their operation. I can't hurt them. You already did. And in their world, that's enough." Alexander's jaw tightened. "I'm not telling you this to scare you, though you should be scared. I'm telling you because you need to understand the situation. These people will find you. It's not a question of if, but when. You have maybe 24 hours before they locate you, and when they do, they won't be interested in conversation." Panic clawed up Lucia's throat. She forced it down, forced herself to think. "Then I'll leave, disappear. I can be on a bus to somewhere by this afternoon." "Where?" Alexander's question was gentle, but pointed. "You have family somewhere? Friends in another state who can hide you?" Lucia stopped. She had no one. Carmela had been her only family, and the friends she'd made over the years were casual acquaintances at best. People she'd shared shifts with but never let get close. "I'll figure it out." "You won't have time to figure it out." Alexander straightened, his full height suddenly imposing in the quiet office. "But I can protect you. I have resources, safe locations, people who can keep you alive while we handle the cartel problem." "Why would you do that?" The question burst out before Lucia could stop it. "You don't owe me anything. I just did what anyone should do. But most people wouldn't have." Alexander moved closer, stopping a few feet from her chair. "You saved my life, Miss Grant. In my world, that creates a debt. More than that, you're in danger specifically because you helped me. I don't let people suffer for loyalty, especially not someone like you." "Someone like me," Lucia repeated, almost laughing. "A waitress who speaks Sicilian? Someone brave enough to speak up when it mattered." His gaze held hers. "That's rare, valuable, and I protect what's valuable." The way he said valuable made something flutter in Lucia's chest, a sensation she firmly pushed aside. This wasn't about attraction or interest. This was about survival. "What does protection mean exactly?" she asked. "A secure location where the cartel can't reach you. Security personnel to ensure your safety. Time for my people to handle the threat permanently." Alexander returned to his desk, pulling a manila folder from the top drawer. "I'm offering you a choice. You can accept my help, or I can arrange for you to leave the country. New identity, passage to Italy, enough money to start over somewhere Sinaloa won't look." He slid the folder across the desk. Inside, Lucia found a passport with her photo, but a different name, Anna Russo. Plane tickets to Rome dated for tomorrow morning. A bank card, with what looked like a substantial balance based on the paperwork clipped to it. "You made these overnight?" she asked, stunned. I have people who handle such things." Alexander's tone suggested this wasn't unusual for him. "The passport will pass any inspection. The money is clean, untraceable. You could be in Italy by tomorrow afternoon, completely off their radar." Lucia stared at the documents, her mind spinning. A new life. A fresh start in the country her grandmother had left behind. Free from danger. Free from the cartel. Free from everything she'd built here. "No," she heard herself say. Alexander's eyebrows rose slightly. "No?" "No." Lucia pushed the folder back across the desk. "I'm not running away from my life because some criminals are mad I interfered with their plan. I've worked for everything I have here. It's not much, but it's mine. I'm not giving that up." For a long moment, Alexander simply looked at her. Then something that might have been respect flickered across his face. "You understand they will try to kill you. I understand you said you could protect me." Lucia met his gaze directly. "So protect me. But I'm not leaving New York." Alexander leaned back in his chair, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You're either very brave or very foolish. Maybe both." Lucia managed a shaky smile of her own. "My grandmother would probably say I inherited her stubborn streak. Tell me about her." The request surprised Lucia. "We have time, and I'd like to know more about the woman who taught you to speak like you're from Palermo." So Lucia told him. About Carmela Rizzo, who'd left Sicily at 20 with nothing but a suitcase and determination. Who'd married young, lost her husband to a construction accident, and raised 3 children while working 2 jobs. Who'd taken in her orphaned granddaughter without hesitation and made sure Lucia never forgot where their family came from. "She died 3 years ago," Lucia finished, twisting the gold earrings. "Heart attack. She was 71. I found her in her chair, knitting needles still in her hands." "I'm sorry." Alexander's condolence carried genuine sympathy. "It sounds like she was an impressive woman." "She was everything." Lucia's throat tightened. "After my parents died, she was all I had. When I lost her, I was completely alone. I understand that feeling." Alexander's expression softened slightly. "My parents were also from Palermo. They came here in the 70s, built their business from nothing. My father died when I was 23. My mother 2 years later. I have a younger sister, Lauren, but I keep her far away from my world. She lives in Boston, works as a teacher, has no idea about most of what I do. That must be hard," Lucia said quietly, "keeping that distance. It keeps her safe." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Which is what matters. She has a normal life, a good life, that's worth more than closeness." They sat in silence for a moment. 2 people who'd lost too much finding unexpected common ground in an office 42 floors above the city. "So what happens now?" Lucia finally asked. Alexander stood, decisiveness returning to his posture. "Now we get you to a secure location. I have an apartment in Tribeca, not a penthouse. Just a functional space we use for people who need protection. It's monitored, secure, and the cartel won't find it." "For how long?" "As long as it takes to eliminate the threat." He pulled a business card from his pocket, black with silver lettering and a single phone number. "This is my personal line. You need anything, you call. Day or night. No one else has this number except my sister and my second in command." Lucia took the card, the weight of it somehow significant in her palm. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You're about to spend days, maybe weeks, confined to an apartment with security watching your every move. It's protective custody, not a vacation. Still better than being dead." Lucia stood, shouldering her purse. "When do we go?" "Now." The apartment in Tribeca was exactly as Alexander had described. Functional, rather than luxurious. 2 bedrooms, a living area with reinforced windows, a kitchen stocked with basics. The security was subtle, but present. Cameras in the hallway. Guards rotated in 8-hour shifts outside the door. Lucia spent the day alternating between pacing and sitting, her mind unable to settle. She'd called her manager at Vittorio, claiming a family emergency that would keep her away for a while. The lie came easily, smoothly. Another small piece of her normal life slipping away. Alexander returned around 9 that evening, carrying bags from a nearby Italian deli. I thought you might be hungry. They ate at the small dining table, conversation flowing more easily than Lucia had expected. He asked about her life. Her dreams before circumstances had narrowed her options. She found herself talking about the languages she'd wanted to study, the degree she'd planned to pursue before money became impossible. What would you do? Alexander asked. If money wasn't an issue. If you could study anything, be anything? Lucia considered the question, unused to thinking beyond the immediate concerns of rent and bills. I'd study linguistics, maybe work as a translator or interpreter. Use the languages I know to actually help people, not just take drink orders. You speak more than Sicilian? Italian, Spanish, some French. I taught myself from library books and online courses. She shrugged, embarrassed. It's not formal education, but I'm fluent enough. Alexander's expression turned thoughtful. That's a valuable skill set. More valuable than you probably realize. When he stood to leave an hour later, Lucia walked him to the door. He paused on the threshold, seeming to debate something internally. You surprised me today, he finally said. Most people would have taken the escape route. Run as far and fast as possible. I'm not most people. Lucia managed a tired smile. Apparently I'm stubborn and foolish. Brave, Alexander corrected quietly. The word you're looking for is brave. Their eyes held for a moment too long, something unspoken passing between them in the narrow entryway. Then Alexander cleared his throat and stepped back. Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next. After he left, Lucia locked the door and leaned against it, her heart beating faster than the situation warranted. She pulled out the business card he'd given her, running her thumb over the embossed numbers. Alexander Bellini, crime boss, dangerous man, her only protection against people who wanted her dead. And somehow, against all logic, someone she was beginning to trust. 7 days in the Tribeca apartment felt like 7 years. Lucia had always considered herself adaptable, someone who could make the best of any situation. But confinement tested that belief in ways she hadn't anticipated. The space itself was comfortable enough. Clean sheets, a functional kitchen, windows that let in filtered sunlight through bulletproof glass. But knowing she couldn't leave, couldn't even step outside for a walk without armed escorts, made the walls press closer each day. She filled the hours with whatever she could find, reading on her phone until her eyes burned, cooking elaborate meals from the groceries that appeared like clockwork every other morning, watching the street below through those reinforced windows, counting taxis, studying pedestrians, searching for any sign of the danger Alexander insisted was still hunting her. The security detail rotated every 8 hours. Different faces but the same watchful silence. Men and women who nodded politely when she offered coffee, but never engaged in actual conversation. They were there to protect her, not befriend her. On the 7th morning, Lucia was staring at her 3rd cup of coffee when her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. She almost didn't answer, then recognized the area code from Alexander's business card. Miss Grant. His voice carried clearly through the speaker. How are you holding up? Lucia glanced around the apartment, at the books she'd already read twice, the television she'd watched until the programs blurred together. I'm going quietly insane, if we're being honest. But I'm alive, so there's that. A low chuckle reached her ear. Fair assessment. I have a proposition that might help with the sanity issue. I'm listening. My people confirmed continued cartel activity in the city. They're looking for you, which means you need to stay protected. But you don't need to stay idle. He paused. I have several meetings scheduled this week with Italian suppliers, legitimate business contacts for the import company. I need a translator who understands not just the language but the cultural context. Someone who can read between the lines. Lucia's pulse quickened. You want me to work for you? I want to put your skills to use while you're under my protection. The meetings will be in secure locations. You'll have security the entire time. And it gives you something productive to do, besides count ceiling tiles. What kind of meetings? Olive oil importers from Tuscany today. Wine distributors from Piedmont on Thursday. All legitimate operations. Nothing that would put you in danger beyond what already exists. His tone shifted slightly. This isn't charity, Lucia. I genuinely need someone with your language abilities. Most translators I hire are competent, but they miss nuances. You wouldn't. The use of her first name sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. She pushed it aside, focusing on the practical aspects. Where would these meetings happen? My office, conference rooms in neutral buildings, a few restaurant locations I control. You'd never be exposed or vulnerable. And you'd be compensated properly, not as a favor, but as an employee. Lucia walked to the window, pressing her palm against the cool glass. Below, the city moved in its endless rhythm. Delivery trucks, business people with coffee, dog walkers navigating crowded sidewalks. Life continuing while she remained frozen in place. "When's the first meeting?" she asked. 2 hours. I'll send a car. The offices of Bellini Import Solutions occupied 3 floors of a building in Midtown, far more corporate and legitimate-looking than Lucia had expected. Glass-walled conference rooms, assistants typing at sleek desks, the hum of normal business operations that could have belonged to any successful company. Alexander met her in the lobby himself, dressed in a charcoal suit that made his dark eyes appear even more intense. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for giving me something to do besides memorize wall textures." Lucia had dressed in the most professional clothes the security team had retrieved from her apartment. Black pants and a cream blouse that felt inadequate next to the expensive fabric surrounding her. "You look fine." Alexander's gaze swept over her once, quick and assessing. "The Tuscany delegation arrives in 20 minutes. 3 representatives from a family-owned olive grove that's been producing oil for 6 generations. They speak English but prefer Italian for business discussions. They're also very traditional, very proud. Respect matters more than anything." "Understood." He led her to a conference room where Joseph was already setting up laptops and presentation materials. The older man nodded at Lucia with something that might have been approval. "She knows what she's doing," Alexander told Joseph. "Let her work." The Italians arrived precisely on time, 3 men in their 50s and 60s wearing suits that had clearly been tailored in Europe. They greeted Alexander with warm handshakes and careful formality, then turned curious eyes on Lucia when Alexander introduced her. "This is Lucia Grant, my translator for today's meeting. She speaks Italian and Sicilian fluently." The oldest of the 3, a man with silver hair and weathered hands, addressed her directly in rapid Italian. "Your family is from Italy, Signorina?" The honorific meant miss, but it felt like a test. "My grandmother came from Sicily," Lucia replied in the same language, matching his regional accent without thinking. "A small village near Palermo. She made sure I learned properly. Not the broken Italian Americans usually speak." Something lit in the old man's eyes. "Ah, a true daughter of Sicily. Your grandmother taught you well. I am Antonio Ricci, and these are my brothers, Marco and Giuseppe. We are very pleased to meet you." The tension in the room immediately softened. What could have been a formal, guarded negotiation transformed into something closer to a conversation between family. Antonio and his brothers relaxed in their chairs, their Italian flowing more freely as Lucia translated back and forth between them and Alexander. But she did more than simply convert words. When Antonio used a phrase that referenced an old Tuscan saying about quality versus quantity, Lucia didn't just translate literally. She explained the cultural context to Alexander, the deeply held belief among traditional producers that rushing meant sacrificing excellence. When Alexander proposed distribution terms, Lucia softened the language slightly, framing it in a way that emphasized partnership rather than transaction. The Ricci brothers responded with enthusiasm rather than the defensive posturing that had apparently stalled previous negotiations. 2 hours later, they had a preliminary agreement that Joseph described as the best terms anyone had managed to extract from the notoriously difficult Ricci family in 5 years of trying. Antonio clasped Lucia's hands as they prepared to leave. "You have a gift, Signorina. Miss. Not just for language, but for understanding people. Your grandmother would be very proud." After the Italians departed, Alexander turned to Lucia with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You were remarkable. I just translated." "No." He shook his head. "You read them, understood what mattered to them, and adjusted the conversation accordingly. That's not translation. That's negotiation at a level most people never achieve." Warmth flooded Lucia's cheeks. "My grandmother always said language is about connection, not just words." She was right. Alexander checked his watch. "It's nearly 7. Have you eaten?" Not since breakfast. There's a place in the West Village I think you'd like. Nothing fancy, just good food and quiet atmosphere. He paused. Consider it a professional dinner. We can discuss how the other meetings this week should be structured. Lucia knew she should probably decline. Maintain some kind of boundary between her situation and whatever this was becoming. But the thought of going back to that apartment, to the silence and the waiting, made the decision easy. I'd like that. The restaurant occupied a narrow brownstone on a tree-lined street, the kind of place tourists would walk past without noticing. No sign outside, just a discreet number above an unmarked door. Alexander led her through to a back room where half a dozen tables were scattered across worn wooden floors. The owner, an elderly Italian woman who called Alexander by his first name, seated them at a corner table and disappeared into the kitchen without taking their order. She'll bring whatever she made today, Alexander explained. Maria doesn't believe in menus. You eat what she cooks or you go somewhere else. My grandmother was the same way. Lucia smiled at the memory. She'd spend all day making Sunday dinner and get offended if you didn't eat 3 helpings of everything. Did you cook with her? Every weekend. She taught me to make sauce from scratch, to roll pasta by hand, all the old recipes her mother had taught her. Lucia traced the grain of the wooden table with one finger. After she died, I couldn't bring myself to make any of it. Too many memories. Alexander nodded slowly. I understand that. My mother's kitchen was her domain. After she passed, my sister tried to cook her recipes, but it never tasted right. Like something essential was missing beyond just the ingredients. Maria returned with wine, a deep red that tasted like earth in summer. Then came plates of food, simple preparations that showcased quality ingredients. Grilled vegetables, fresh mozzarella, bread still warm from the oven. They ate and talked, the conversation flowing between personal history and present circumstances. Lucia told him about her dreams of studying languages. The scholarship applications she'd filled out before her grandmother's medical bills consumed what little savings they had. I worked at a coffee shop in college, she explained. Took night classes when I could afford them. Made it through 2 semesters before the money ran out completely. After Carmela died, I had to drop out and work full-time just to cover rent. That's when you started at Vittorio? No, I worked at 3 other restaurants first. Vittorio was actually a step up. The pay was better and the clientele tipped well if you kept your head down and didn't cause problems. Until you decided to cause a very specific problem by saving my life. Lucia met his gaze across the table. I'd do it again. Even knowing what it cost me. Why? Alexander leaned forward slightly. You lost your job, your apartment, essentially, your normal life. Most people would regret that decision by now. Because letting you die would have cost me more. She struggled to articulate the feeling. I would have lost myself. The person my grandmother raised me to be. Some things matter more than convenience or safety. Something shifted in Alexander's expression. A softening around his eyes that made him look younger, less guarded. Your grandmother raised someone remarkable. Before Lucia could respond, Maria appeared with dessert, effectively ending the moment. But the warmth in Alexander's gaze lingered, even as the conversation shifted to safer topics. They were walking to the car an hour later when Lucia noticed the headlights. A dark sedan had been parked across the street when they arrived. Now it pulled away from the curb the moment they stepped outside, moving slowly in their direction. Alexander's hand found her elbow immediately, his grip firm but not painful. Get in the car. Now. His driver already had the engine running, passenger door open. Lucia slid into the back seat as Alexander joined her, his body angling to shield hers from the street. Joseph appeared from somewhere, phone already at his ear. We've got a tail, the driver said, his voice calm despite the tension crackling through the vehicle. Black sedan, 2 occupants visible, following since we left Midtown. Alexander's jaw tightened. Lose them. Don't let them track where we're going. The next 15 minutes passed in a blur of turns and acceleration. The driver navigated the city streets with precision, using traffic and timing to put distance between their car and the pursuing sedan. Lucia gripped the door handle, her heart hammering as they wove through intersections and doubled back on their route twice. Finally, after a series of turns that left Lucia completely disoriented, the driver spoke again. Clear. They lost us near Union Square. But Alexander didn't relax. They know she's mobile now. They'll be watching, waiting for another opportunity. He turned to Lucia, his expression grim. The Tribeca apartment isn't safe enough anymore. They're actively hunting, which means we need better security. Where then? I have a property in Greenwich, Connecticut. About 45 minutes from the city, gated, monitored, much harder to approach without being detected. He pulled out his phone, already typing. We go there tonight. You pack whatever you need from the apartment, and we leave within the hour. Lucia wanted to argue, to insist this was too much, that she didn't want to be more in his debt than she already was. But the memory of those headlights, the deliberate way that Sedan had followed them, silenced the protests. Okay, she said quietly. Alexander's hand found hers in the darkness of the back seat, his fingers warm and steady. I meant what I said. I won't let them hurt you. Lucia believed him. That should have frightened her more than the cartel did, this growing trust in a man whose world was built on violence and power. But sitting in that car, his hand wrapped around hers, she couldn't bring herself to care about the logic of it. She was safe. For now, that was enough to hold on to. 3 weeks in Greenwich felt like stepping into a different world. The property sat at the end of a private road, surrounded by mature trees that created a natural barrier from curious neighbors. The house itself was understated for someone of Alexander's means, a colonial-style home with cream-colored siding and black shutters, gardens that had been professionally maintained, but not ostentatiously designed. Lucia had expected something more fortress-like, all surveillance equipment and armed guards patrolling the perimeter. Instead, the security was subtle. Cameras hidden in landscaping, sensors embedded in the driveway, a team that rotated through a converted carriage house at the edge of the property, present but not intrusive. Her bedroom occupied the second floor, overlooking the back garden where late autumn had painted the remaining leaves in shades of rust and gold. The furniture was simple but well made, the kind of pieces designed for comfort rather than display. Someone had stocked the closet with clothes in her size. Casual items that suggested whoever did the shopping understood she wasn't the designer label type. The first few days, Lucia barely saw Alexander. He commuted to the city for meetings, returning late in the evenings to disappear into his home office. She spent the time exploring the house, reading from the surprisingly extensive library, teaching herself to use the professional-grade espresso machine in the kitchen. On the 4th morning, she found Alexander already in the kitchen when she came downstairs. He stood at the counter in jeans and a navy sweater, the most casual she'd seen him, reading something on his tablet while coffee brewed. "Morning," he said without looking up. "I'm working from home today. Hope that doesn't bother you. It's your house." Lucia moved to pour herself coffee from the pot he'd already made. "I'm the intruder here. You're a guest under my protection. Not the same thing." He finally glanced up, his gaze lingering on her for a moment before returning to the tablet. "Joseph is sending over contracts from 2 potential suppliers in Rome. I'll need your assessment of the language. Make sure nothing's buried in the translations we received. You want me to work on them today?" "If you're willing." The office has a second desk and better internet than the rest of the house. So began a routine that evolved naturally over the following weeks. Mornings in the kitchen, Alexander making coffee while Lucia prepared breakfast. Conversations about everything from politics to childhood memories flowing easily in the quiet hours before the day's demands took over. Days spent working in his home office, Lucia at the second desk he'd cleared for her, translating contracts and correspondence while Alexander handled the legitimate and less legitimate aspects of his business. She discovered she had a talent for the work beyond just language skills. Reading contracts revealed patterns, connections between suppliers and distributors that told stories about relationships and power dynamics. She'd point out clauses that seemed innocuous but could be leveraged, terms that looked favorable but contained hidden costs. "You should have studied business along with languages," Alexander commented one afternoon, reviewing her notes on a particularly complex wine distribution agreement. "You have an instinct for it. My grandmother used to say I noticed what people didn't say more than what they did." Lucia stretched in her chair, her back tight from hours at the computer. "Same skill, just applied differently. It's valuable. More valuable than you probably realize." He closed the laptop and stood. "Walk with me. I need to clear my head and you've been staring at screens all day." The garden paths wound through what had probably once been formal landscaping, but had softened with time into something more natural. They walked in comfortable silence. The November air crisp, but not yet bitter, leaves crunching underfoot. "Tell me something," Alexander said eventually. "What would you be doing right now if none of this had happened? If you were still working at Vittorio, living your normal life?" Lucia considered the question. "Probably getting ready for a dinner shift. Checking my bank account to see if I could afford new shoes since mine have holes in the soles. Planning how to stretch my grocery budget for another week. That's existence, not living. It was my existence. My life." She bent to pick up a particularly vibrant red leaf, twirling it between her fingers. "I didn't hate it. It wasn't what I dreamed of. But I was independent, taking care of myself. That mattered. And now? Now I'm in a beautiful house, doing work I actually enjoy. But I can't leave without armed guards, and I'm here because someone wants me dead." She released the leaf, watching it spiral away in the breeze. "I don't know what this is." Alexander stopped walking, turning to face her. "It's temporary. The situation with the cartel, I mean. My people are working on it. Once it's resolved, you can go back to your life if that's what you want." "Is it?" Lucia met his gaze. "What I want, I mean. Do I get a say in any of this?" "You've always had a say. I'm not keeping you prisoner." "Aren't you?" The words came out sharper than intended. "I'm grateful for the protection, truly. But let's not pretend I have real freedom here. I go where you say, when you say, with whoever you assign to watch me. My entire life is in your hands." Alexander's jaw tightened, "because the alternative is you dead in an alley somewhere. Forgive me for prioritizing your survival over your independence. I'm not ungrateful. I just want to understand what happens when this is over. Do I go back to being a waitress? Do I disappear with that fake passport you made? What's the endgame here? I don't know." The admission seemed to cost him something. "I haven't thought that far ahead because right now, keeping you alive is the only thing that matters." Before Lucia could respond, his phone buzzed. Alexander glanced at the screen, his expression immediately hardening. "I need to take this. We'll continue this conversation later." He strode back toward the house, already speaking rapidly into the phone in Italian. Lucia followed more slowly, that familiar feeling of being adrift settling over her again. That evening, Alexander's sister arrived unannounced. Lucia was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard voices in the foyer. A woman's laugh followed by Alexander's lower tones. She wiped her hands on a towel and moved to the doorway. The woman embracing Alexander was petite, maybe 5'3", with the same dark hair and brown eyes but softer features. She wore jeans and a Boston University sweatshirt, canvas bag slung over one shoulder, looking nothing like the polished professionals Lucia had seen in Alexander's office. "You said you'd visit last month," the woman was saying, poking Alexander in the chest. "Then last week. I figured if you wouldn't come to me, I'd come to you. Lauren." Alexander's tone carried warning and affection in equal measure. "You should have called first. And give you time to tell me not to come? No chance." Lauren's eyes found Lucia hovering in the kitchen doorway. "Oh, you have company. I didn't realize. I'm sorry. This is Lucia Grant," Alexander said, his hand moving to the small of Lauren's back, gently pushing her forward. "Lucia, my sister Lauren, who apparently doesn't understand boundaries," says the man whose entire business is crossing boundaries. Lauren extended her hand to Lucia with a warm smile. "It's nice to meet you. Alex never has guests here, so you must be someone special." Heat crept up Lucia's neck. "I'm working for your brother temporarily. He's been kind enough to let me stay here while some business issues get resolved." "Business issues?" Lauren's gaze flicked to Alexander with obvious skepticism. "Right. And I'm the Queen of England." "Lauren," Alexander's voice carried clear warning now. Fine. I'll behave." Lauren sniffed the air. "Something smells amazing. Are you cooking?" "Just pasta with vegetables. Nothing fancy." Lucia gestured back toward the kitchen. "There's plenty if you'd like to stay for dinner." "I'd love to." The meal passed pleasantly, Lauren filling the conversation with stories about her students, the chaos of teaching middle school, the apartment she'd recently moved into in Cambridge. She had an easy warmth that made Lucia relax despite the awkwardness of the situation. Alexander watched them interact with an expression Lucia couldn't quite read, something between contentment and concern. After dinner, Lauren insisted on helping with dishes, while Alexander took a call in his office. The moment he left the room, Lauren turned to Lucia with sharp intelligence in her eyes. "So, what's really going on here? I told you. I'm working for him and needed a safe place to stay." "Lucia." Lauren's tone was gentle but firm. "I haven't seen my brother in 6 months. He never works from home, never has people stay here. This place is his sanctuary from everything else in his life. So either you're in serious danger and he's protecting you, or something else is happening. Maybe both." Lucia dried a plate slowly, debating how much to share. "The danger part is true. I witnessed something I shouldn't have, and now the wrong people want to make sure I can't testify. And Alex is keeping you safe." "Yes." Lauren nodded, filing away the information without pressing for details she clearly knew better than to ask about. "He's good at that. Keeping people safe, I mean. Sometimes too good. He thinks if he controls every variable, nothing bad can happen to the people he cares about. I'm not sure I qualify as someone he cares about. I'm more of an obligation. You're in his house, eating dinner at his table, working in his office." Lauren's gaze was knowing. "My brother doesn't do obligations here. This is where he comes to get away from all that. If you're here, it's because he wants you here." The words settled into Lucia's chest, warm and unsettling in equal measure. Lauren stayed through the weekend, sleeping in one of the guest rooms, filling the house with energy it had lacked before. She and Lucia fell into easy companionship, cooking together, walking the garden paths, talking about books and travel and the lives they'd imagined for themselves before reality intervened. On Sunday evening, as Lauren prepared to drive back to Boston, she hugged Lucia tightly. "Thank you." "For what?" "For whatever you're doing that makes him look less lonely." Lauren pulled back, her eyes serious. "Alex has been alone in ways that have nothing to do with company. He keeps everyone at a distance because he thinks that's what protects us. But you're here, and he's different, present. That's not nothing." After Lauren left, the house felt quieter, emptier. Lucia found Alexander in his office, staring at his computer screen without really seeing it. "Your sister is wonderful," she said from the doorway. "She's a menace," but affection softened the words. "Did she interrogate you about being here?" She was curious. "I didn't tell her anything specific." "Good. The less she knows about my world, the safer she is." He turned in his chair to face Lucia fully. "She likes you. Lauren doesn't like people easily. The feeling is mutual." They stood in silence for a moment, something unspoken hanging in the air between them. Then Joseph appeared in the hallway behind Lucia, his expression grim. "Boss, we need to talk. It's about the Sinaloa situation." Alexander's entire posture shifted, the warmth draining away. "My office. Now." Lucia started to leave, give them privacy, but Alexander's voice stopped her. "Stay. This concerns you too." Joseph closed the door behind them, pulling out a tablet that he set on Alexander's desk. "We got intelligence from our contact in Newark. The cartel is changing tactics. They're not going after Lucia directly anymore." "What do you mean?" Alexander's voice was dangerously quiet. "They're planning to hit your operations instead. 3 simultaneous attacks on distribution points in Jersey, Queens, and the Bronx. Maximum damage to force your hand." "Force my hand how?" Joseph's gaze flicked to Lucia, then back to Alexander. "They're going to demand you hand her over in exchange for backing off. They want to make it too expensive for you to protect her. Make you choose between one witness and your entire empire." Lucia's stomach dropped. "When?" "We don't have an exact timeline. Could be days, could be a week. But it's coming." Alexander stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "Double security on all locations. Move the high-value inventory to secondary sites. I want surveillance on every approach route to our facilities." "Boss, even with all that, if they hit 3 places at once, we're going to take losses. Significant losses." Joseph's tone was careful. "The question is whether the losses are worth it. Are you suggesting I give them what they want?" "I'm suggesting we consider all options." "No." The single word cut through the room like a blade. "Absolutely not. I don't negotiate with cartels, and I don't sacrifice people under my protection. We prepare for the attacks, we defend what's ours, and we make them regret ever targeting my operations. This could turn into a war, Joseph warned. Full-scale, messy, with bodies in the street kind of war. Then that's what it becomes. Alexander's voice was ice. Set up a meeting with the families in Boston and Philadelphia. If Sinaloa wants to play this game, they'll find out what happens when they go against the entire eastern seaboard. Lucia stood frozen as Joseph nodded and left the room. Alexander remained at the window, his back to her, shoulders rigid with barely contained fury. "You're going to start a war," she said quietly. "Because of me." "No. They started this war when they tried to ambush me, and then decided to hunt someone who saved my life." He turned, and the raw intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "This isn't your fault, Lucia. Don't take responsibility for their choices. But if I wasn't here, if you just gave them what they wanted, you could avoid all of this." Alexander crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "Is that what you think? That your life is worth less than some money and territory? I think a lot of people could die because I overheard a conversation, and hundreds more would have died if you'd stayed silent." His hands came up to frame her face, thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "You saved my life, Lucia. You gave me information that prevented a catastrophic attack. I'm not going to repay that by throwing you to the wolves." "Why?" The question came out as barely more than a whisper. "Why does it matter so much to you?" Alexander's expression shifted, something vulnerable breaking through the controlled exterior. "Because you're not just an obligation or a witness to protect. You haven't been for weeks now. Then what am I? Someone who made me remember that not everyone in my world is calculating angles and playing power games. Someone who speaks her mind and makes terrible coffee and gets genuinely excited about olive oil contracts." His voice dropped lower. "Someone who brought something real into a life that hasn't felt real in longer than I can remember." Lucia's heart hammered against her ribs. "Alexander, I know this is complicated. I know the timing is terrible and the situation is impossible. But I need you to understand that I'm not doing this out of obligation or pride or business strategy." His forehead touched hers, his breath warm against her skin. "I'm doing this because the thought of them hurting you makes me willing to burn everything down." She closed the final distance between them, her lips finding his in a kiss that felt like inevitability and choice combined. He responded immediately, one hand sliding into her hair while the other wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer. It wasn't the explosive, passionate collision from movies. It was deeper than that. Quieter. A recognition of something that had been building between them for weeks, finally finding expression. When they finally broke apart, both breathing harder, Lucia rested her forehead against his chest. "This is a terrible idea," she murmured. "Probably the worst I've ever had." Alexander's arms tightened around her. "But I'm done pretending it's not happening." They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other while outside the window, darkness settled over Greenwich, and somewhere in the city, a cartel planned their next move. The storm was coming, but for now, in this quiet office with autumn wind rattling the windows, Lucia let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they'd find a way through it together. 2 weeks after that kiss in Alexander's office, Lucia woke to winter sunlight streaming through the bedroom windows in Greenwich. The relationship between them had shifted into something both easier and more complicated. Stolen moments in the morning over coffee, his hand finding hers during walks through the frost-covered garden, conversations that stretched late into the night about everything and nothing. But the danger hadn't disappeared. If anything, it had grown more urgent. By early December, the city had sharpened at the edges. Darker mornings, colder wind, longer shadows that seemed to follow her into every room. Lucia found Alexander in his office on a gray December morning, phone pressed to his ear, his expression carved from stone. She paused in the doorway, recognizing the tone he used when dealing with serious business. "I don't care what it costs you," he was saying. "The cartel is moving against my operations, which means they're moving against the stability of the entire eastern corridor. You want chaos spilling into your territory when they think they can take whatever they want?" A pause. Then, "Good. I'll have Joseph send the details. We coordinate everything through secure channels from now on." He ended the call and pinched the bridge of his nose, exhaustion clear in the lines around his eyes. "Boston?" Lucia asked quietly. "Philadelphia, actually. That's the third call this morning." Alexander set the phone down. "I've been working on this for 10 days now, trying to get the other families on board with a coordinated response. It's like herding cats, except the cats all have their own armies and trust issues." Lucia crossed the room to stand beside his desk. "Are they agreeing?" "Finally, yes. Boston came around last week. Philadelphia just confirmed this morning. We'll have support if the cartel makes their move." He reached for her hand, pulling her closer. "But it's a delicate alliance. Everyone wants assurances, guarantees, favors in return. Politics even in warfare." "What kind of favors?" "Territory adjustments, percentage points on certain operations, protection agreements for their people if things go sideways." Alexander's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "Nothing I'm not willing to give if it means we have the strength to push Sinaloa back permanently." Lucia had been spending her days doing more than just translating contracts. Alexander had given her access to communications his people intercepted, messages in Spanish and occasionally Italian that needed decoding. She'd discovered she had a talent for pattern recognition, connecting dots between seemingly unrelated conversations to build bigger pictures. That afternoon, while Alexander was on yet another negotiation call with Boston, Lucia sat at her desk reviewing the latest batch of intercepted messages. Most were mundane, logistics about shipments and payments, the everyday business of criminal operations. But one conversation made her pause. Two men discussing a meeting. One voice she didn't recognize, speaking Spanish with a distinctly Mexican accent. The other had the harder edge of Colombian Spanish, subtle differences in pronunciation that her ear caught immediately. She played the audio 3 times, transcribing carefully, then cross-referenced with earlier intercepts. A pattern emerged. The same Colombian voice appeared in 5 different conversations over the past 2 weeks, always arranging meetings, always in Newark. Lucia pulled up the maps Joseph had shared, marking locations mentioned in the conversations. They clustered around an industrial area near the port, several warehouses that the intelligence reports identified as cartel fronts. "Alexander." She turned in her chair as he entered the office. "I found something." He crossed to her desk immediately, leaning over her shoulder to study the screen. "What am I looking at?" "Intercepted communications over the past 14 days. This voice here," she played a clip, "appears consistently. He's Colombian, high-ranking based on how others defer to him, and he's planning a meeting with the cartel leadership in Newark, at one of their warehouse fronts." Alexander's eyes narrowed. "When?" "The conversations don't give an exact date, but based on the context, soon. Within the next week, maybe sooner." Lucia pulled up her notes. "They're discussing terms for expanding cocaine distribution through the eastern seaboard. The Colombian is bringing product samples and new supply chain proposals. This is the connection we've been looking for." Alexander straightened, already pulling out his phone. "If we can disrupt their supply relationship with the Colombians, we damage their operational capacity significantly." "There's more." Lucia hesitated, then pushed forward with the idea that had been forming. "I could get inside that meeting." Alexander's head snapped toward her. "Absolutely not. Listen to me first. They'll need a translator, someone who speaks both Spanish and English fluently for business negotiations. The cartel leadership probably speaks decent Spanish, but the Colombians will want precision in their contracts. I could pose as a freelance translator, get hired through an intermediary." "No." The word was flat, final. "You're not walking into a room full of cartel members. That's not even a consideration. But think about it practically. We need evidence that connects their leadership directly to the drug trafficking. Testimony from someone external, someone not affiliated with either organization. That's admissible in court in ways that your people's testimony wouldn't be." Alexander's jaw clenched. "I have professionals who handle this kind of work. People trained for infiltration." Joseph didn't flinch. "We tried placing one of ours in late October. He was made before he even reached the table. They're paranoid now. New faces get checked, questions get sharper, and anyone who hesitates doesn't get a second chance. Who all have accents that would mark them as American the second they opened their mouths." Lucia stood, facing him directly. I speak Spanish with neutral fluency. I can claim my family is from Argentina if anyone asks. Explain away any inconsistencies. And I understand both the language and the business context well enough to be convincing. The answer is no, Lucia. I'm not risking your life for intelligence. We can get other ways. What other ways? She pressed. You said yourself that the cartel has been careful, keeping their leadership insulated. This is an opportunity to get someone inside their operation who they won't suspect. They'll suspect everyone. These aren't amateurs, which is exactly why they won't suspect a freelance translator hired through a legitimate channel. Lucia had spent the past hour thinking this through, anticipating his objections. But there's another reason this has to be someone external to your organization. Alexander crossed his arms, his expression dark. I'm listening. You said the cartel has been one step ahead of you multiple times. They knew about the warehouse at the port before you moved operations there. They knew your distribution schedule well enough to plan simultaneous attacks. She met his gaze steadily. Someone inside your organization is feeding them information. The silence that followed was heavy. Alexander's eyes went cold, the kind of cold that suggested violence simmering just beneath the surface. You're certain about this assessment? Not certain, but it's the only explanation that makes sense. Which means any operation you run internally is compromised before it starts. But someone from outside, someone they don't know about, someone they have no reason to connect to you, that could work. Alexander turned away, pacing to the window. She could see him working through the logic, fighting against it, even as he recognized the truth in her words. Even if what you're saying is accurate, he said without turning around, the risk is enormous. If they discover who you really are, if anything goes wrong, I can't protect you in there. I know. You could die, Lucia. Painfully. These people don't show mercy to infiltrators. I understand the stakes. She moved closer to him. But staying hidden forever isn't living. The cartel isn't going to stop hunting me just because time passes. They'll wait months, years if necessary, for an opening. The only way I get my life back is if their leadership is taken down completely. Alexander finally turned to face her. There has to be another way. If there is, we haven't found it. Lucia reached for his hand. You've been protecting me for weeks now, keeping me safe, giving me a place to hide. I'm grateful for that, truly. But I need to be part of the solution, not just the problem everyone's trying to manage. He studied her face for a long moment, conflict clear in his expression. You're not a problem. Then let me help end this. On my terms. Lucia, please. She squeezed his hand. I can do this. I know I can. But I need you to trust me. Alexander closed his eyes, and she could see the war playing out behind his controlled exterior. Protection versus pragmatism. Emotion versus strategy. Finally, he opened his eyes. I need to verify something first. If what you're saying about needing external testimony is true, if the FBI actually needs this kind of evidence, then we consider it. But I'm not making this decision without confirming every aspect. Who will you ask? I have a contact. Someone who owes me favors and won't ask too many questions. He pulled out his phone. But if I do this, if I even consider letting you walk into that meeting, we do it my way. Complete security protocols, extraction team on standby, audio surveillance, and the first sign of trouble, we abort. Non-negotiable. Agreed. The call took 20 minutes. Alexander spoke in careful code, discussing hypothetical situations and legal requirements. When he hung up, his expression was grim. The FBI has been investigating Sinaloa's eastern operations for 18 months. They have circumstantial evidence, but nothing solid enough for prosecution that would stick. They need direct testimony linking leadership to trafficking operations, preferably with documentation or recordings to support it. He set the phone down heavily. Your assessment was correct. An external witness with no criminal connections would be invaluable to their case. He exhaled slowly, as if weighing every word. They won't touch it without clean procedure, he added. Statements, recordings, chain of custody, everything has to be airtight, or it dies on a prosecutor's desk. Joseph says they can put you under limited use protections for what you say in character, but only if you stay inside the plan. Lucia felt relief and terror in equal measure. So we do this. We plan it carefully, meticulously. And if at any point I think the risk outweighs the potential gain, we stop. Alexander's gaze was intense. I mean it, Lucia. Your safety comes before any intelligence gathering or FBI cases. I understand. The next 5 days passed in intensive preparation. Joseph brought in members of Alexander's security team who had experience with undercover operations. They drilled Lucia on her cover story until she could recite it in her sleep. Ana Russo, freelance translator based in Hoboken, recently relocated from Buenos Aires. References available from 3 different translation agencies that Joseph's people had created overnight. They practiced her responses to common questions, taught her how to identify exits in unfamiliar spaces, gave her hand signals for communicating with the surveillance team that would be monitoring from outside the warehouse. She learned basic self-defense moves, enough to buy herself a few seconds if things went wrong. Your goal isn't to fight your way out, the security instructor told her on the 3rd day. Your goal is to stay alive long enough for extraction, make noise, create chaos, give us the opening we need to get to you. Lucia practiced the emergency signal until her fingers cramped. A specific pattern of taps on any hard surface that would trigger immediate response from the team. Alexander watched most of the training sessions from the periphery, his presence a constant reminder of what was at stake. At night, back in Greenwich, they didn't talk about the operation. Instead, they existed in a strange suspended state, cooking dinner together, watching movies on the couch, maintaining normalcy that both knew was temporary. On the 5th night, the evening before the operation, Lucia couldn't sleep. She found Alexander in his office at 2 a.m, staring at surveillance photos of the Newark warehouse where the meeting would take place. You should be resting, he said without turning around. So should you. She entered the room, closing the door behind her. Can't stop thinking about tomorrow? I'm reviewing exit routes, backup positions for the extraction team, contingencies for every scenario I can imagine. He finally looked at her. And I keep coming back to the fact that I'm letting you walk into a building full of people who want you dead. You're not letting me do anything. This is my choice. Doesn't make it easier. He stood, crossing to where she waited. If anything happens to you tomorrow because I agreed to this plan, I won't forgive myself. Lucia reached up to cup his face, feeling the tension in his jaw. Then make sure your team is as good as you say they are. Make sure the plan is solid. And trust that I can handle myself in there. I do trust you. It's everyone else I don't trust. She pulled him down into a kiss, pouring everything she couldn't articulate into the contact. Fear, determination, affection that had grown deeper than she'd intended to allow. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers. Come back to me tomorrow, he whispered. Whatever happens in that warehouse, you come back. I will. She meant it with everything she had. I promise. They stood wrapped in each other as the clock ticked toward morning, toward the moment when Lucia would step into the role of Ana Russo and walk into the most dangerous situation of her life. Outside, winter wind rattled the windows. Inside, 2 people held onto each other against the uncertainty of what dawn would bring. The warehouse in Newark looked abandoned from the outside, exactly the kind of unremarkable industrial building that people drove past without a second glance. Rusted metal siding, cracked pavement in the parking area, a faded sign for a plumbing supply company that had probably gone out of business years ago. Lucia sat in the passenger seat of an unmarked sedan 3 blocks away, dressed in gray slacks and a coral blouse that projected professionalism without drawing attention. Her hair was pulled into a low bun, minimal makeup, small gold hoop earrings. She looked like exactly what she was supposed to be, a freelance translator hired for a single afternoon's work. Audio check. Joseph's voice came through the nearly invisible earpiece tucked into her left ear. Can you hear me clearly? Yes, Lucia said quietly, adjusting the thin silver necklace that concealed a microphone capable of picking up conversations from 15 feet away. Good. The pen drive is in your portfolio. Inside pocket on the right. Don't reach for it until you're certain no one is watching. The files are set to auto-install the moment it connects to any device. 30 seconds maximum, then remove it. Lucia's hands were steady as she checked her reflection in the visor mirror, but her pulse hammered against her throat. 5 days of training hadn't erased the fundamental truth. She was about to walk into a room full of men who would kill her without hesitation if they discovered who she really was. Extract team is positioned at 3 points around the building, Joseph continued. Alexander is monitoring everything from the command vehicle 2 blocks north. The moment you signal distress, we're coming in. Understood? Understood. The intermediary who hired you will meet you at the entrance. His name is Marco Vega, low-level cartel associate who handles administrative tasks. He doesn't know anything about you beyond what's in your fake portfolio. Keep your answers short, professional, boring. Lucia closed the visor, taking one steadying breath. She thought about Alexander, about the expression on his face when she'd left Greenwich that morning. He'd kissed her at the door, his hands framing her face, and whispered, "Be smart. Be careful. Come back to me." She intended to do exactly that. "I'm ready," she told Joseph. The sedan pulled up to the warehouse entrance at exactly 2 o'clock. A man in his 30s waited outside, smoking a cigarette, wearing jeans and a leather jacket. Marco Vega. He flicked the cigarette away as Lucia approached, his eyes sweeping over her with casual assessment. "Ana Russo?" he asked in Spanish. "Yes." "You're Marco?" Lucia kept her tone neutral, professional. "Right. Come on. They're waiting inside." He held the door open, revealing a dim corridor that smelled of concrete and old machinery. "You speak Colombian Spanish, yeah? Not Mexican?" "I'm fluent in both dialects. My references should have specified that." Lucia followed him down the corridor, portfolio held against her chest. The building looked abandoned from outside, but inside revealed recent activity. New locks on doors, security cameras in corners, the faint hum of a generator providing power. Whatever. Just make sure the translation is accurate. These guys are paranoid about misunderstandings. Marco led her through a second door, into what had once been a loading area, now converted into a makeshift conference space. A table sat in the center, surrounded by folding chairs. Harsh fluorescent lights hung from chains, casting everything in stark white illumination. 4 men already occupied the room. 3 stood together near the far wall, clearly the Colombian delegation based on their posture and the way they watched everything with alert calculation. The 4th sat at the head of the table, a man in his 50s with graying hair and the kind of stillness that suggested violence held carefully in check. The cartel leader. Lucia recognized him from the surveillance photos Alexander's people had compiled. "This is the translator," Marco announced. "Ana Russo, from the agency." The leader's eyes found Lucia, assessing her thoroughly. "You come recommended?" "I've worked for several businesses in the area," Lucia replied in Spanish, keeping her voice steady. "My references are available if you'd like to verify." "That won't be necessary. We're on a tight schedule." He gestured to a chair positioned between the 2 groups. "Sit there. You translate everything exactly as it's said. Nothing added, nothing omitted. We clear?" "Completely clear." Lucia took the indicated seat, setting her portfolio on the table in front of her. The pen drive felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds inside the inner pocket. One of the Colombians stepped forward, extending his hand. "Rafael Cortez. I represent suppliers from Medellin. These are my associates, Diego and Luis." Lucia shook his hand, noting the firmness of his grip, the expensive watch on his wrist, the tailored fit of his suit. This was someone high in the organization, not a middleman. "Shall we begin?" Rafael asked in Colombian Spanish, his accent pure paisa. For the next 40 minutes, Lucia translated negotiations that made her skin crawl. Cocaine shipments measured in tons. Distribution networks spanning from Baltimore to Boston. Payment structures involving millions of dollars. She kept her face neutral, her voice professional, converting their words with mechanical precision. The cartel leader, whose name she learned was Hector Salazar, reviewed documents spread across the table. Rafael had brought samples, small packages wrapped in plastic that sat beside his briefcase like everyday business materials. "The quality is verified?" Hector asked. 94% pure. Our processing facilities use the newest techniques, minimal cutting, maximum profit margin for distribution. Rafael's smile was all business. "Your people will appreciate the consistency." Lucia translated, her mind tracking everything. The confession to drug trafficking, the admission of international smuggling, the detailed discussion of distribution networks. Every word was being recorded, every admission captured by the microphone hidden in her necklace. "We should discuss payment terms," Hector said, pulling a laptop from a bag beneath the table. "I have our financial projections for the next quarter, showing how we'll structure the buyback." He opened the laptop, fingers moving over the keyboard. This was the moment. The opportunity Joseph had described. "I need to use the restroom," one of the Colombians, Diego, announced suddenly. "Down the hall, second door," Marco directed from his position near the entrance. Diego left. Rafael and Luis continued discussing logistics with Hector, their attention focused on the laptop screen showing spreadsheets and financial data. Lucia shifted slightly in her chair, reaching into her portfolio as if retrieving a notepad. Her fingers found the pen drive, a small rectangular device no bigger than her thumb. She kept it palmed in her left hand, waiting. The conversation continued around her. Numbers and percentages and distribution percentages. Rafael leaned closer to the laptop to examine figures, blocking Hector's view for a critical few seconds. Lucia dropped her pen deliberately, letting it roll toward the edge of the table. "Excuse me," she murmured, bending to retrieve it. In the motion, her left hand moved beneath the table edge, finding the laptop's USB port by feel. The pen drive slid in smoothly, a barely audible click as it connected. She straightened, pen retrieved, heart hammering so violently she was certain everyone could hear it. The laptop screen flickered for just a moment, the files installing in the background, while the spreadsheet remained visible. 20 seconds. 30. The progress indicator Joseph had described would be nearly invisible on the screen's edge. "These projections assume stable supply," Rafael was saying. "Any disruption in production affects our ability to deliver. Our supply chain is reliable," Hector insisted. "We've maintained consistency for 18 months. 45 seconds. Lucia forced herself to breathe normally, to maintain her neutral translator expression. Diego returned from the restroom, resuming his position with the other Colombians. The pen drive had to come out. If they noticed it, if anyone looked at the right moment, the entire operation collapsed. Lucia cleared her throat softly. "Excuse me. I need to mark the contract sections for translation." "May I?" She gestured toward the papers on the table, closer to the laptop. "Go ahead," Hector said, without looking up. She leaned forward, her left hand disappearing beneath the table again. The pen drive slid free, back into her palm, then into her pocket in a single smooth motion. Her training had emphasized economy of movement, nothing that would draw attention. The files were installed. The modified financial records showing systematic theft from the Colombian suppliers now resided on Hector's laptop, backdated to appear 6 months old, carefully crafted to suggest diversion of funds that Rafael's organization should have received. "Let's review the payment schedule one more time," Rafael said, pulling his own tablet from his briefcase. "I want to confirm our numbers match yours." Hector pulled up a different spreadsheet. Rafael and his associates studied their tablet, comparing figures. Lucia watched the moment unfold with growing dread and anticipation. The numbers wouldn't match. Couldn't match. Because the files on Hector's laptop now showed significantly different payment amounts than what Rafael's records contained. "Wait," Rafael's voice sharpened. "This shows 3.2 million for the September shipment. Our records indicate 3.8 million. "That's incorrect," Hector said, frowning at his screen. "We paid exactly what was invoiced. Show me the transfer documentation." Hector opened another folder on his laptop, clicking through files. With each screen, the discrepancies became more apparent. Payments that didn't match invoices. Transfers showing amounts different from what the Colombians had recorded. 6 months of systematic differences, all suggesting that Hector had been skimming from the top. "What is this?" Rafael's tone had gone ice cold. "You've been stealing from us?" "I haven't stolen anything. These are our accurate records." But Hector's confusion was genuine. Lucia could see it. He had no idea the files had been modified. No reason to suspect the laptop was compromised. $600,000 missing from September alone. Luis had his own phone out now, pulling up records. October shows similar discrepancies. "You've taken over 2 million from our organization." "That's impossible. Marco, get our accountant on the phone." But Raphael was already standing, his hand moving inside his jacket. We don't negotiate with thieves. Diego and Luis stood as well, their movements synchronized, hands also moving toward concealed weapons. Marco had gone pale near the door, clearly realizing this business meeting was spiraling into something lethal. "You need to calm down," Hector said, his voice dropping into dangerous territory. "Whatever your records show, they're wrong. We can verify everything through our banks. Your doctored records mean nothing." Raphael's hand emerged holding a gun, the metal gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "You thought we wouldn't notice? That we'd just keep supplying while you robbed us?" Hector's chair scraped backward. His own weapon appeared from somewhere beneath the table, pointing directly at Raphael. "Put the gun down, now. Not until you explain where our money went." Lucia's hands moved to the edge of the table, tapping out the emergency pattern Joseph had drilled into her. 3 quick taps, pause, 2 taps, pause, 3 more. The signal transmitted through the microphone, reaching the extraction team positioned around the building. The situation exploded in the next second. Raphael fired, the shot deafening in the enclosed space. Hector dove sideways, returning fire. Diego and Luis had their weapons out, shooting at Marco, who'd pulled his own gun. The warehouse filled with the sharp crack of gunfire, the smell of cordite, shouting in Spanish and English. Lucia threw herself under the table, crawling toward the wall. Her training kicked in. Move, create distance, stay low, don't be a target. Bullets struck metal and concrete, ricocheting with terrifying whines. Glass shattered somewhere. Doors burst open with explosive force. New voices shouted commands in English. "Federal agents, drop your weapons. Hands where we can see them." Alexander's extraction team came through a side entrance simultaneously. Armed men in tactical gear moving with military precision. The combination of FBI agents and Alexander's people filled the warehouse, surrounding the combatants from multiple angles. Hector tried to run, making it 3 steps before Joseph tackled him, driving him face first into the concrete floor. Raphael and his associates were on their knees within seconds, FBI agents securing their hands with zip ties while reading them their rights. Lucia stayed under the table, arms wrapped around her head, until she heard Joseph's voice. "Clear. Get her out." Hands pulled her gently from beneath the table, Joseph's face appearing in her field of vision. "You hurt?" "No. I don't think so." Her voice came out shaky, her ears still ringing from the gunfire. "Good. Let's move. We need you away from here before anyone starts asking questions the FBI can't answer." He guided her through the chaos, past federal agents processing the scene, past the Colombians being read their rights, past Hector Salazar cursing in Spanish as evidence bags were filled with the cocaine samples and documents scattered across the table. The unmarked sedan was running, door already open. Lucia collapsed into the back seat, adrenaline draining away and leaving her trembling. The driver pulled away from the warehouse immediately, taking side streets away from the growing cluster of law enforcement vehicles converging on the location. 2 blocks away, the sedan stopped beside a black SUV. The door opened and Alexander was there, reaching for her, pulling her out and into his arms in one motion. Lucia buried her face against his chest, finally allowing herself to shake. "You're okay," he murmured against her hair. "You're safe. I've got you. It worked," she managed. "The files. The Colombians saw them. Everything worked." "I know. We heard everything." He pulled back just enough to check her face, her arms, verifying she was truly unharmed. "You did exactly what you were supposed to do. The FBI has everything they need. You coordinated with them? 3 days ago. I provided copies of all our intelligence, the intercepted communications, financial documents connecting Hector to the trafficking operations. They've been investigating Sinaloa for months, but couldn't make arrests stick without concrete evidence and testimony from witnesses not connected to either organization." His hands framed her face. "You gave them exactly that. The recordings from today, combined with the physical evidence at the scene, the weapons charges, the cocaine possession. They have ironclad cases against everyone in that warehouse." Lucia leaned into his touch, exhausted and relieved in equal measure. "What happens now?" "Now we let the FBI do their job. Hector faces federal trafficking charges. The Colombians are charged with conspiracy and weapons violations. With their leadership arrested and their supply relationship destroyed, the cartel's eastern operations collapse. No money, no product, no organization to come after you. Are you sure? Joseph's people have been monitoring their communications all day. The moment news of the arrests hit, the cartel started pulling resources back west. They're cutting losses, not mounting rescue operations. Alexander's thumb brushed her cheekbone. You're safe, Lucia. Really, truly safe. The threat is over. She kissed him, not caring that Joseph and the security team were watching from discreet distances. When they broke apart, she pressed her forehead against his. Take me home. Greenwich? Wherever you are? She managed a shaky smile. That's home now. In the following weeks, news broke in pieces. Federal indictments against Hector Salazar and 8 other high-ranking cartel members in New York and New Jersey. Seizure of $3 million in assets and 500 kilograms of cocaine. The complete dismantling of Sinaloa's East Coast distribution network. The Colombian suppliers publicly ended their partnership, releasing a statement about betrayal and theft that effectively destroyed any chance of the cartel rebuilding those connections. Lucia watched it unfold from the safety of Greenwich, working with Alexander on legitimate business contracts, while the FBI built their cases. Ana Russo disappeared from public record, a translator who'd been in the wrong place at the right time. Her testimony sealed as part of the federal investigation. And slowly, carefully, Lucia started believing she might actually get her life back. Not the life she'd had before, waiting tables and scraping by. Something better. Something real. Something she was building with a man who'd risked everything to keep her safe. The threat that had hung over her for months finally dissolved, replaced by the cautious hope of a future she could choose for herself. 3 months felt like a lifetime, and no time at all. Lucia stood in front of the full-length mirror in the Greenwich bedroom, adjusting the dress she'd chosen for tonight. The fabric was a rich amber gold that caught the light when she moved, fitted through the bodice before flowing into a skirt that ended just above her knees. Professional but elegant, confident without being flashy. She barely recognized herself. Not just the dress, or the way her hair had been styled in soft waves instead of her usual practical ponytail, but the expression on her face. The woman looking back at her stood differently, carried herself with a certainty that hadn't existed 4 months ago. You look beautiful. Alexander appeared in the doorway, already dressed in a navy suit that fit him like it had been made specifically for tonight. Which it probably had been. I look terrified. Lucia corrected, turning away from the mirror. This is a huge event, and I keep thinking about everything that could go wrong. Nothing will go wrong. You've planned every detail for weeks. The Sicilian producers are flying in specifically because they trust you. The buyers are excited about the product line. This is your success, Lucia. Own it. She crossed to where he stood, reaching up to adjust his tie, even though it was already perfect. Our success. This only happened because you gave me the opportunity. I gave you the position. You earned everything else. His hand settled at her waist. Director of International Relations at Bellini Import Solutions. A title you negotiated for yourself, with a salary you insisted be market rate, not inflated because we're involved. You've closed deals with 3 countries in 3 months that other people spent years failing to secure. Lucia had insisted on those terms when Alexander first offered her the job. No special treatment, no favors disguised as business opportunities. She wanted to succeed or fail based on her actual abilities, not because the boss was sleeping with her. She'd spent 1 sleepless night listing every obligation that would still be waiting when the danger was gone. Rent, utilities, the debts she'd been juggling since college, then walked into his office determined not to trade fear for dependence. Market salary, my own office, complete autonomy over my division, she recited. You agreed to everything. Because you were right to demand it. I respect you too much to patronize you with charity disguised as employment. Alexander kissed her forehead. Besides, you've already proven the investment was worth it. The profit margins on the deals you've negotiated are significantly higher than what we had before. The job had turned out to be everything Lucia had hoped for, and more. She spent her days working with suppliers across Italy, Spain, and Argentina, negotiating import contracts for olive oils, wines, specialty foods. Everything was completely legitimate, the legal side of Alexander's business operations that had nothing to do with the darker aspects of his world. She'd traveled twice to Italy in the past 2 months, meeting with producers, touring facilities, building relationships that went beyond simple business transactions. Her fluency in Italian and understanding of cultural nuances made her invaluable in ways that pure business acumen couldn't replicate. The relationship with Alexander had evolved naturally alongside her professional growth. He spent half his time in Greenwich now, working remotely when possible, making the drive to the city only when absolutely necessary. They'd fallen into rhythms that felt domestic in the best way, cooking together, morning runs through the neighborhood, evenings spent reading in comfortable silence. Lauren visited monthly, always with some excuse about needing to escape Boston, but really just wanting to check on her brother. She and Lucia had become genuine friends, texting throughout the week, planning trips to museums and theater shows when Lauren came to town. "We should go," Alexander said, glancing at his watch. "The car is ready." Before leaving, Lucia made one stop. The cemetery in Queens was quiet on a Thursday evening, most visitors already gone for the day. She found Carmela's headstone easily, a simple gray granite marker engraved with her grandmother's name and dates. Alexander waited near the car, giving her privacy. Lucia knelt beside the grave, running her fingers over the carved letters. "Hi, Nonna," she said quietly. "Grandma," the word that still made her throat tighten. "I know it's been a while since I visited. Things have been complicated." She smiled despite the tears threatening. "You'd be so proud. I'm using everything you taught me, the languages, the cooking, the courage to speak up when it matters. I have a real job now, one where I actually use my brain instead of just my ability to carry plates." She thought about the night at Vittorio, the moment she'd decided to warn Alexander. "I did what you always said. I didn't turn away from someone in danger, even though it was terrifying, and somehow that led to all of this, a life I never imagined I could have." Lucia placed the small bouquet of flowers she'd brought against the headstone. "I met someone. Alexander. He's complicated and dangerous and probably not who you would have chosen for me. But he's good to me, Nonna. He sees me as an equal. Pushes me to be better. Doesn't try to control me even when he's worried. I think you would have liked that about him." The evening breeze rustled through the trees. Lucia stood, brushing grass from her knees. "I'll come back soon, and I'll keep making you proud. I promise." She returned to the car where Alexander waited. He didn't ask what she'd said, just took her hand as they drove toward Manhattan. The event was being held at Vittorio, the same restaurant where everything had begun. Alexander had purchased a partial ownership stake in the business 2 months ago, replacing the previous management with people he trusted. He'd insisted on having the launch there despite Lucia's initial reluctance. "It's poetic," he'd argued. "You saved my life in that building. Now we're launching a new phase of our legitimate business there. Full circle." Of course, he'd also conducted extensive security checks on every employee, every vendor, every person who would be in the building tonight. Nothing was left to chance. The restaurant looked transformed from the last time Lucia had seen it. White lights strung through the dining room, elegant floral arrangements on every table, a string quartet playing soft classical music in the corner. The guest list included importers, distributors, restaurant owners, food critics, people who mattered in New York's culinary world. Lucia stepped out of the car, Alexander's hand steady at her elbow. Several people were already mingling in the entrance area, wine glasses in hand, conversations flowing in multiple languages. A few heads turned as they entered, recognizing Alexander immediately. "Mr. Bellini? Thank you for the invitation." A restaurant owner Lucia had met during negotiations approached, shaking Alexander's hand before turning to her. "And you must be Lucia Grant. I've heard wonderful things about your work. The Tuscan olive oil you sourced is exceptional. Thank you. I'm glad you're pleased with it." Lucia shook his hand, slipping into the professional persona she'd developed over the past months. Confident, knowledgeable, approachable. More introductions followed. Lucia worked the room naturally, switching between English, Italian, and Spanish depending on who she was speaking with. She discussed harvest conditions in Tuscany with one importer, explained the unique qualities of Sicilian wine with another, laughed at stories about difficult negotiations with a third. Across the room, she caught glimpses of Alexander doing the same, charming buyers and critics with the easy authority he wielded so naturally. But his eyes kept finding hers, checking in, making sure she was okay. Lucia, a familiar voice made her turn. Maria, one of the servers she'd worked alongside 3 years ago, stood there with a tray of appetizers. Oh my God, it really is you. When they said Lucia Grant was hosting this event, I thought it must be a different person. Maria, Lucia smiled warmly. How are you? Still working here? 4 years now. But look at you. Maria's eyes swept over the dress, the confident posture, the way important people were gravitating toward Lucia's conversations. What happened? Last I heard, you'd left for a family emergency and never came back. Life took some unexpected turns. Lucia accepted a small bruschetta from the tray. I ended up working in import negotiations, discovered I had a talent for it. Working for him? Maria glanced toward Alexander with obvious curiosity. Everyone knows he's one of the owners now. I work for Bellini Import Solutions, yes. He gave me an opportunity and I made the most of it. Maria studied her face for a moment, then smiled. Good for you, seriously. You always seemed like you were capable of more than just serving tables. I'm glad you found something better. After Maria moved on, Lucia made her way to the back terrace, where the evening air provided relief from the crowded dining room. The city lights glittered in every direction, taxis streaming past on the street below, the endless energy of Manhattan pulsing even at this hour. She was standing at the railing when Alexander joined her, 2 glasses of wine in hand. He offered her one without speaking, simply standing beside her as they looked out over the city. How are you holding up? He asked after a moment. Better than I expected. It's strange being back here, seeing people I used to work with. But good strange, I think. She sipped the wine, recognizing it as one of the Piedmont selections she'd negotiated last month. Did you see the critic from the Times? She was practically gushing about the product quality. I saw. You've impressed a lot of people tonight, Lucia. People who don't impress easily. We impress them. This is your company, your reputation. Our company now. Our reputation. Alexander turned to face her, setting his wine glass on the railing. I meant what I said earlier. You've transformed the international division in 3 months. The revenue projections for next quarter are already exceeding what we hope to see by year 2. Because the products are excellent and we're offering competitive pricing. Because you understand people and culture in ways that pure business analysis can't teach. His expression turned serious. I need you to know something. When I offered you this position, I did it because I genuinely needed someone with your skills. Not because we were involved, not as a way to keep you close or safe. You earned this role based on your abilities. I know that. Lucia touched his face gently. You've never made me feel like anything other than a competent professional at work. Even when you disagree with my strategies, you let me make the decisions. That trust means everything. You saved my life that night in this restaurant. But over these past months, you've done something more important. Alexander's hands found her waist, pulling her closer. You reminded me that building something real, something legitimate, can be more satisfying than all the power and territory I've fought to control for years. You're building an empire without violence. That's what your sister said she always hoped you'd do. I'm building a life, a real one, with someone who sees me as more than just the boss of a criminal organization. He kissed her softly. Thank you for taking a chance on me, Lucia, for trusting that I could be more than what I was. Thank you for letting me be exactly who I am without trying to change me or protect me so much I can't function. She rested her forehead against his. We're good together. Not perfect, but good. Better than good. Alexander pulled back slightly. I know it's only been a few months since all the chaos settled. I know we're still figuring out what this relationship looks like long term. But I want you to know that I'm in this, Lucia. Completely. Whatever the future holds, I want to build it with you. No dramatic proposals, she teased. No rings presented on terraces overlooking the city? Not yet. When that happens, and it will, I want it to be because we both know exactly what we're choosing. Not because of adrenaline or gratitude or proximity during crisis. His smile turned genuine. Besides, you'd probably negotiate the terms of any engagement anyway. Lucia laughed, the sound genuine and free. Probably. I'd want clear understanding about expectations, division of responsibilities, long-term goals. See? This is why we work. You approach commitment like a business contract, and I find that incredibly attractive. They stood wrapped in each other for a few more moments, before the sounds of the party drew them back inside. The evening continued successfully. Deals were discussed, contacts were exchanged, critics praised the quality of every product they sampled. Near midnight, as the final guests were leaving, Lucia found herself back in the main dining room that had once been her workplace. The tables where she'd served countless meals now hosted empty wine glasses and dessert plates from her own event. The kitchen where she'd grabbed rushed orders now produced food sourced through contracts she'd negotiated. Quite the transformation, Joseph commented, appearing beside her with his usual quiet efficiency. From server to executive in 4 months. Not many people could pull that off. I had good support. And motivation. Lucia glanced at him. Thank you, by the way. For everything during the operation. I know you thought it was too risky. It was too risky. But you handled yourself well. Joseph's expression remained neutral, but his tone carried approval. The boss is different since you came into his life. More focused on the legitimate operations. Less interested in the territorial disputes that used to consume most of his energy. That's good for everyone. After Joseph moved away to coordinate the security team's departure, Alexander found Lucia again. The restaurant was nearly empty now, staff cleaning tables, the quartet packing their instruments. Ready to go home? He asked. Home. Not his house or her apartment or any specific location, just the concept of wherever they were together. Yes, Lucia said. Let's go home. They walked out of Vittorio together, equal partners leaving behind the place where their story had begun in crisis and fear. The car waited at the curb, but before they got in, Alexander pulled Lucia into one more kiss under the Manhattan streetlights. To new beginnings, he murmured against her lips. To building something real, she replied. The car pulled away from the restaurant, carrying them back toward Greenwich, toward the life they were constructing together. A legitimate empire built on actual business rather than intimidation. A partnership based on respect and trust rather than obligation or debt. Lucia looked out the window as Manhattan's lights blurred past, thinking about the journey from frightened waitress to confident executive, from woman hiding in safe houses to someone building her own future on her own terms. 4 months ago, she'd made a choice to speak up despite the danger. That choice had cost her the small, safe life she'd been living, but it had given her something infinitely better, the chance to become who she was always meant to be. And sitting beside Alexander as they drove through the night toward home, Lucia knew with absolute certainty that she'd make the same choice again, every single time. The end.